So I'm Meera. I've spent a very large part of my life looking at terrorist activities and mapping terrorist activities against online chatter. I've worked with different sectors, with governments, with Manchester Police, if somebody's here from there. And there's Thomas with me, who's had previous experience working with large-scale companies, and the German army. And this really comes from many years of research. I've chased hackers around the globe. I've met them, spoken to them, stayed with them to see how they work. And it also comes from spending a lot of time in underground chat rooms, etc. So just before I start, I want to talk about we all have our own views on how we see cyber attacks in the future. And this is just something that I thought we're likely to see between 2025 and 2030. We are likely to see more attacks using AI and quantum technologies. I don't know, did anyone notice that a quantum box is now available in the dark web to attack Tesla cars? Anyone heard of that? No? Okay. In the past, you needed a lot of coding skills to carry out attacks. That's no longer the case. You have AI doing that for you. So we are going to see more attacks that require fewer skills. We are going to see a lot more killware attacks. Now, killware attacks, I don't know if somebody read, this was a small piece of news which really spoke about a drone attack killing a person of interest in, I think it was somewhere in Africa. And this drone killed the person. And it was a small snippet of news, but it's so important and relevant because that's killware, where we will start seeing drones, where we'll start seeing technology used to carry out physical attacks. That will increase as well. Blockchain and metaverse, there's no getting away from Web 3.0. We will have to pivot. Those of us in cybersecurity will have to start looking at the areas. Metaverse is likely to have to cause more cyber attacks. Fake news, if there's anyone here from DCMS, I've been having conversations with them around disinformation and misinformation because, they're both very different. A lot of hackers have been involved in disinformation activities, and we are likely to see that this will grow through social engineering and through more of us using metaverse as we go along. 5G, 6G will cause problems, most of it related to privacy. And we've already seen, and we're starting to see a lot more attacks on the cloud because everybody's offering every single service on the cloud. So why do we then need hacker innovation? Why are we even discussing about hacker innovation? One of the frustrations that I had, which is why Sistel was set up, is that we don't talk about hackers. We keep talking about defensive technologies, but we don't do that with our understanding of how are hackers getting it right so many times. We don't really understand, and we cannot explain how hackers are able to so quickly ramp up efforts and keep trying new techniques to sort of attack systems. We have neglected this understanding of how hacker groups interact amongst each other. And we tend to focus on specific groups. Every time there's an attack, we hear the word anonymous, we have heard of black energy, we know Sutnex. So all of these are very specific groups that target specific industries, but we don't really discuss hackers as a group and as an evolving group. So modern hacking activities, hackers have changed from the time I've known them. In fact, a couple of years ago, I think more than 5 years ago, they were sort of smaller bands of people, weren't really interested in the financial aspect of it. We have seen that change and evolve. Economic activity is now at the heart of what hackers do. There's a lot of bulletproof hosting that they offer. They're really focused on social engineering. They use open source software as well. There's a lot of collaboration, underground activity that actually takes place. They are now getting more and more involved in traditional criminal activities as well. Back in the day when I worked on looking at terrorist activities, we were looking at how hackers were involved with terrorist organizations. And that has now evolved to more financial gain as well. And there's also lots of layers of support. They're structuring themselves now as companies, which really makes a difference. So how do hackers innovate? This took a lot of research. I could stand here for 5 years telling you that because it was a 5-year PhD. So looked at primary research on hackers, so chased hackers around the globe, spoke to them, stayed with them, saw what they did. And I developed a tool that goes into hacker chat rooms and picks out data and throws up social maps, which is the little diagram you see down there, as to how they actually interact with each other. The innovation process itself was really interesting, and I'll come to that in a bit. Hackers are like layers of onions, so you actually have different groups, and there's a core group of people, core group of very, very good hackers, and they have layers around them. So people who dip in and out, some who are more involved with that particular community. What they do is they focus on, their main interest is in innovating, because when a certain exploit does not work, they'll try something else. They love demonstrating skills. In fact, it's an honor to be called a hacker in most hacker communities, because it's something that's conferred upon you. They use a lot of knowledge sharing mechanisms. I don't know if you've heard the word toots. It's a very common word. If you hear somebody say toots, they could be a hacker, actually. They use toots, which is in hacking communities, very rapid upskilling tutorials, which they will use to try and understand and sharpen the skills very, very quickly. When a hacking innovation is actually developed, it's not that the community will simply adopt that. You have change leaders within hacker groups that will actually take that technology, see if it works. They're not like IT companies or how we see technology. We love new pieces of tech. They don't. They will vet it very, very carefully. And we have this idea about hackers being black hats, gray hats, white hats. I think that's ancient, if I'm honest. We need to start looking at hackers by skills. If you look at the bottom table there, the different types of hacker communities are actually skill-based. They are hacker groups that are more focused on their own abilities. They have groups that are very technically sound. Some are very good at programming and programming alone, and some are very good at fast attacks and successful attacks, although they may not be using the most advanced tech. Now, what does this mean? It means they need collaboration, which is exactly what they're doing. So how do hackers innovate? I won't go into the diagram there because that will take me a lot of time, but that's actually the exact process by which hackers innovate. The two important things here, which unfortunately I can't circle, but there's this bottom little circle that talks about branching and forking. Most of you who work on open source would have heard the word forking, where you can take a piece of code, do something else with it. Hackers do exactly that. So their software cycles resemble the traditional software cycles a little bit, but the main difference being the speed at which they work, the speed at which they're able to interact with each other. And the two concepts here, hacking and sort of forking and branching. They are able to take pieces of code, branch it off, and very quickly develop something else and come back and fit it into the main picture, which we haven't seen traditional IT companies do. So how do they innovate? Again, a lot of it takes place in the underground chat forums. They don't use technology the way technology companies do. It's very, very different, and they learn continuously through the use of tools. So I'll stop here, and I'll hand over to Thomas. If there's one takeaway from this, it's that hackers don't repeat their same tricks. They learn, they adapt, and they adopt very, very quickly. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this, Meera. Welcome to the session. So Meera's talked a little bit about hackers, the innovation process hackers go through. Let's talk about some of the innovations we're actually facing in organizations. So one of the things most organizations are actually interested in at the moment is the Internet of Things. So we're applying this left, right, and center in different types of environments. We'll speak about this in a bit. Then, of course, most of us are also looking at AI. How can we make our organizations, how can we use data a bit more efficiently? How can we extract more from the data we have? Because we have an abundance of data. We share that data across organizations. The supply chain was mentioned by the first speaker here. We're sharing that, and that applies to different industries. And finally, we have the idea of quantum computing. So we want to make things even faster, right? And so we like this idea in organizations of, well, profit equals revenue minus loss. We're going to be implementing these devices to make our organizations better places, to be more competitive. Now, obviously, this has implications, right? Because these different innovations, they pose risks, and these risks, they're manifested in relation to GDPR. So a large part of the planet will be covered with something like GDPR because it's being used as some form of a benchmark to look in other economies. But then there are also going to be supply chain implications in terms of, well, if we want to onboard a new supplier, well, we need to pursue some form of cybersecurity risk assessment. And then the other thing we'll see as a knock-on effect of these innovations and the onslaught of cyber happening is that board members will become ever more aware of cybersecurity. So if we look at AI, then AI is pretty much in charge in any industry. Whether we look at energy, whether we look at the water grid, electricity grid, all organizations are using this. So for example, we've spoken to an energy organization. They're working on very complex mechanisms to make hydrogen work for us. And the calculations they need to use, they are so complicated, they cannot figure them out themselves. So what do? They get AI from open source. They go to Facebook, download the code, and then use it. So then we had a chat about, well, do you know that this data, the code can be poisoned? Do you know what you're actually using to do these calculations? And the funny thing is they cannot even assess whether the calculations are right because it's so complicated. And so at other times, AI is simply bought off the shelf. We need a particular formula, we just buy it off a vendor. Well, is that secure? Have we tested it from a cybersecurity perspective? And these activities, they happen across organizations and across supply chains. The Internet of Things is the other innovation that needs to be looked at. So this happens also across different verticals. So if we look at the healthcare sector, if we look at smart homes, if we look at different infrastructure projects, the Internet of Things is there. We've just been part of the smart accelerator at Sunderland City, and they want to turn Sunderland into a smart city. That's all very nice. So all the buildings, all the devices that are in these buildings are connected. They send information, receive information. The problem is they may not be very secure. We've recently talked to a consortium of construction companies in Ireland, and they're very, very well aware of, well, these are the technologies we're inserting into the smart cities, the buildings, but we don't know how to secure them because they're partially so small we cannot insert any security in them. And then there are other infrastructural areas or industrial areas where the IoT is deployed. So it's essentially everywhere. We also feel the need that in an Industry 4.0 environment that we need to use sensors across different stages of the value chain to analyze data, share that data, and that makes us more vulnerable altogether. So if we, for instance, look at the oil and gas sector, we've recently spoken to an oil and gas organization. They're vertically integrated. To some extent, some of these activities are outsourced, and they're using the Internet of Things. They're using AI across different stages to possibly reduce well equipment downtime, to do asset tracking, to look at the inventory levels of oil. Now, all these activities can be hacked. So across this entire supply chain, we're facing these risks. Also, pipeline leakages can be tracked using IoT devices. If we look at the port environment, which is another risky industry from my perspective, then we have different infrastructural layers which exist, and they're all connected. These vessels, they operate different IoT, they operate AI. They transfer data from the sea to the land. In the past, we've just spoken to somebody working from the Navy. They used to use cables to transfer data under the water to the land. Now they're using quantum secure communication, right? So they have already advanced a little bit because they've realized, well, if we use quantum secure communication, nobody can hack us, or it's less likely. And the same scenario applies in the healthcare sector. So we're using different types of devices. Either physicians monitor the equipment that we as patients use, or we as patients have our own devices which we need to monitor. We share all sorts of data. The patient is in the middle. The cost associated with losing this patient data is atrocious. We've seen this in the recent NHS attack, right? So the question is, if we look at the innovation cycle of these three innovations, let's say IoT, AI, and quantum computing, then what happens is we have engineers who develop some form of innovation. The result is then a new technology. This technology is then converted or developed into a more robust platform. And then we have early adopters down at stage 4. And once these early adopters reach a critical mass, this becomes universal. And then we have across our infrastructures, across organizations, we use different applications to make our lives better, to increase profit, reduce cost. Now this is the computer innovation cycle. We know, we're very well aware of this. However, the computer innovation cycle is way ahead of what we do in terms of the innovation cycle associated with cybersecurity aspects. So all organizations innovate in terms of, yes, we need more AI, we need more IoT. We need to look at quantum computing to make our AI calculations more efficient, more effective. But the cybersecurity innovation cycle is usually years behind the computer innovation cycle. So that's the first problem from an organizational perspective. The second problem is that, and this builds on what Meera said earlier, if we think about the innovation process, then hackers can be seen as innovators in terms of cybersecurity innovation. Organizations or companies are probably laggards in terms of cybersecurity innovation. They jump very quickly on the bandwagon of IoT, AI, quantum computing, but the cybersecurity is behind. So what do we get then? We get this hackers who are on this massive trajectory towards developing a fairly high degree of capability to hack organizations in relation to these new devices, based on what Meera said, that, well, these guys, they like to fiddle about with things. They like to investigate, how can we break this? Initially, maybe not in a malicious fashion, but, well, if they can, well, we might just try to hack the CIA, maybe. We've had a conversation with somebody who just said this. Now, so hackers operate at a capability level, but if organizations remain merely as laggards in terms of cybersecurity innovation for all the computer innovations they implement, we have this massive divide in terms of, well, hackers can attack, but organizations can hardly defend. Now, this is reflected in the next slide. So if we look at increased investments in cybersecurity, they have increased massively. They will increase even more. Whilst at the same time, these investments increase, we have a massive increase in cyber attacks happening at the same time. What does that mean? It either puts us as an industry in a very bad position because what we're offering is not credible, or maybe organizations are not offering the solutions that are required to fight off hackers. Or maybe we need to understand hackers a bit better to understand, well, how they operate and what we can do against them. I want to leave you with two thoughts here. The first one is about, well, those of you who work in organizations, how do you go about your digital transformations? What do you do? How do you innovate? Who do you rope into this process? And at the same time, then, once you've completed that reflection cycle, maybe have a look at, well, we're digitalizing. We're a digital company. We've recently spoken to an oil company. They're digitally integrated. They even want a price. And we talked about cyber. Oh, cyber, we're just starting with cyber. So are you the same? Are you the same? Or are you actually looking at your digital innovation and at the same time, well, okay, we've digitalized now. How do we actually make this secure? Do we have a process? Do we have an organizational process, a cultural change process for that in place in our organization?